What does it really take to build a B2B startup beyond the pitch decks and the press coverage? In this episode of the Unsold podcast, I speak with Aditi Sinha, former CEO of Locale.ai. We talk about navigating early traction, fundraising, and the pursuit of product market fit. We also talk about what happens when you have conviction but the market doesn't move fast enough. This episode is a grounded, honest look at startup life, one every founder should hear. All right, Aditi, I'll read something out to you. Let me know if you can recognize what this is.
Okay.
Why is the thought of failure so painful? Why does it seem so real? More real than hope? Why can't I see myself reaching my full potential? Why does disappointment feel inevitable? Maybe because I can't live up to the perfection I demand, because I measure my worth in impossible terms. What if everything I work for crumbles into dust, leaving nothing to show for the years I begged for it? Who wrote this?
So I actually write a lot of poetry from time to time. So this was actually one of the poems I had written maybe about 4 years back. Something like that. I don't remember. I was just very new to the startup journey, and poetry is one of my ways in which I sort of channel my feelings and, bring that to life. So yeah, this was actually, this piece is called How to Survive a Panic Attack.
How to Survive a Panic Attack. That's right.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I think this sets up a conversation today because we'll talk about reflecting about your journey since Locale. So just a little bit of a background to our audience is we met about 2018, and then you had just begun Locale back then.
Right.
And the idea was to get some kind of foundational marketing get going. All right. So I want to reflect on your journey, and I want to begin at the beginning. Now, what was your original vision for Locale? Was there a this has to exist moment that lit the spark?
Yeah. So actually, with Locale, given our previous experience of working in this company called Social Cops, which is now called Atren. So I met my co-founder there. And, in our experiences, we saw that, most of the teams, let's say that are in the mobility sector or in the delivery sector or in the hyperlocal sector, all of these teams have very specialized SaaS tools that they use, right? So if you take any team from design to data to engineering to sales to marketing to HR to finance, right? Like all of them have specialized tools. But we were working with operations teams, right? And they were still using a combination of Excel sheets and some internally broken systems, right? Which were obviously not optimal. So the vision started like that, can we build a specialized SaaS product, for operations teams in all of these companies that are responsible for managing your on-ground fleet, right? And the idea was, just like you have, products like Mixpanel and Amplitude that help you understand your digital products and how they are performing, with Locale will help you understand how your ground is performing, right? Especially for companies that have a very huge chunk of their operations as on-ground operations, right? So that was the vision.
Right. So how did you validate the problem and pick let's say, your first ideal customer?
Yeah, so actually it was very interesting. We started pitching Locale without even, a website. So we just had a name, and, I knew a lot of seniors from college who were working on in all of these companies. So we would just, set up calls with them, and we would like, hey, we've built this product. Are you interested to see a demo, and are you interested to, use it? And almost everyone said, yeah, this sounds very interesting. I would love to see, what you've built. And we would also understand a lot more deeper, like how they're solving this today, what the current challenges are. I remember we were on to our call number 4th or 5th, and one of those prospects, they were like, hey, sure, but I would like to see your website first. And we really didn't have anything. So I still remember me and my co-founder, over the weekend, we just built a very basic website and we sent it over to that person, right? So a lot of it was this philosophy where we were pitching before building, which sort of helped us validate, exactly what we were building and doing. So very, very funny story.
Fair enough. So a lot of calls, a lot of demos, building the website, getting the
Yeah.
word out there. So
Yeah.
what at the first, let's say, they do this with politicians. They say the first 100 days of Modi, the first 100 days of Trump. So what did the first 100 days at Locale look like?
I think I would maybe answer this in two parts. One is like what was I or the business side of the company doing, and what was the tech side of the company doing, right? So my job was essentially twofold. One is both of us were figuring out what to build. So that was the most important bit, like ideating, validating, brainstorming with our customers. But in addition to that, you can't just rely on one or two customers to validate, right? So the top of the funnel, I would say validation was happening via content and marketing. So I was writing a lot of LinkedIn posts, creating a bunch of videos and talking about the problem that we were solving, writing blogs. And I wanted to see sort of what was the feedback that we were getting, right? Then on the other hand, I would basically, then make a list of what are the, perfect ICPs or prospects for Locale. And I would sort of reach out to them and do calls with them, right? Saying, okay, this is what we're building. What do you think? Is this interesting? Do you want to use it? Can we come to your office, give you a demo, stuff like that. And on the other hand, we had picked one or two of these marquee customers, and we would go to their office. We would sit with them. I would not go for all the meetings. It was mostly, my co-founder and maybe a couple of engineers. So, they would go to these customers. They would sit with them. I remember we have spent days in the Bounce office, the Denso office, where we would sit with these operations teams, and whatever we were building, we wanted them to use it, and we would just show it to them and they would use it, and we would not ask them for feedback. We would first see how they're using it. And then after that, we would sit and we would interview them. Okay, what is the ideal, vision of the solution? What is missing? What is not missing? How are you doing this, before Locale? How are we making your lives easy? Basically, just a lot of questions so that, we could figure out, okay, what are the patterns in terms of insights that we're getting?
Fair. There's this interesting story which I often recollect about the early days of building a company. So the former CEO, still the founder of Zoho, Sridhar Vembu, reflects on his early days at Zoho back in the mid-90s. He says they were engineers and who happened to be his brothers, as well as a good industry friend. And he came on board as a sales engineer. So he said the product was already ready, but somebody had to sell. So he went out, he tried his hand, and he said he was not at all a salesperson. And then he happened to get a customer who paid, let's say, something like $30,000. And then once the deal was signed, the check was signed, then the customer took Sridhar to the side and he said, "You're an idiot." He said, "Why? Why am I an idiot?" He said, "I could have easily paid 10 times more. You don't know how to sell." So then he realized I needed a good salesperson. And then he said, I would have done things differently. So reflecting back on the initial days, how would you do things differently if you were to start something from scratch?
I mean, I would do so many things differently, right? So I mean, just let's start with the questions that we used to ask, right? I came across this book called The Mom's Test, which is now very famous book for, customer validation and discovery. And, in that book, they talk about how we are asking the wrong questions to our customers. So I still remember when we started, those were the questions. The wrong question is what we would ask our customers, right? But the right questions are, primarily focused about how are people solving this today? What are the inefficiencies in the process? And what exactly is the value of your solutions or stuff like that? So I think I would use those specific questions to validate. Not ask, people if this is interesting or they would use it, because the answer of that always tends to be a yes. I think the other thing I would do, which we then eventually realize, is that the market for our first idea turned out to be much smaller than we had actually assumed. Back then when I started, we always thought that, we're starting with a niche segment, which is like the hyper local market. But then from there, we'll sort of expand into logistics and those kind of verticals, right? You can start with a niche, but in the validation process, you should definitely also validate your adjacent markets as well. Because we did actually speak to a bunch of logistics players, but not a lot. Because if we had done that, we would have realized that, logistics companies don't have the kind of data in that kind of format that we required in our product, right? And if we had that insight, maybe we would have, built a more horizontal product, or, build a different solution altogether, right? So I think I would divide my market into different niches, and then I would validate for each of them before I start building my product and decide what is the niche that I should go for. And finally, I think I would do some sort of pricing discovery. Initially, we were like, just use this product for free. We want to see the value that we are delivering, and then we will probably charge, right? But that sort of leaves the destiny entirely on the customer's hands. What I would have done now is, ask them, this is the price that we will charge if we value this kind of, if we deliver this kind of value, right? Are you in or not? I'm not asking you to pay today, but let's say if this value is delivered, then, does this make sense? Maybe with the initial 5, I would have not signed an order form. But, and this is something we started doing later, where even before our POCs and our pilots, we used to sign an order form saying, this is the duration. If this is the value that is derived, this is what you'll pay, right? So these are, some changes I would do now.
Fair. I think this neatly boils down to the product and the market itself, just leading up to the GTM, your first GTM strategy. When did the first pivot happen leading to launching a GTM? Can you just throw light on that?
Yeah. So you mean which year was the pivot?
No, the first 100 days was about talking to a lot of people, a lot of calls, meeting a lot of people, giving a lot of demos.
Right.
And then when did you launch the first, let's say, full-fledged GTM and say, okay, now I think we have a good grip on what this particular category or industry wants, and let's go charge. In that sense, so what was the pivot? Because you said some assumptions get eliminated, and then you say, okay, the first product was like this, but now we are prepared to take to the market. So what were those initial changes just before GTM?
Yeah. Basically what happened was, so we launched like a demo of our product that people could just come and play around with, right? But that had sample data, that didn't have customers' data. It was very similar to the demo that Amplitude also had at that time. So I think that was the first time we sort of launched this saying, this gives you some sense of what Locale can do for you. But of course, if you want to see this on your data, then you sort of reach out to us and we can make that happen. So that sort of gave our tofu and our mofu, I would say, in terms of our needs. So that was a good, fun. But what started happening was, like I said, right, like in the initial niche that we had, this product was a hit. So, we expanded from India to international markets. We had customers in the US, in Europe, in Singapore, in the Middle East. So that way we were pretty sorted. Like we were able to, derive that value. Our contracts, like our ACV was somewhere around, from 36 to about, let's say, 60K a year, right? So, it was, like a full-fledged enterprise system back then. But what started happening was, so we had this motion that was working really well, but we wanted to sort of expand from this market to the next market. So we did get a bunch of customers in India, in Southeast Asia, but so we got like the cream of the market, right? Which had the right technology, which had the right maturity to work with a product like this. But then as and when we started going deeper into the market, we realized that, okay, there's a big gap. A lot of very big logistics companies don't even have the lat longs and the location data that we really needed for our product to function. So, that was like our aha moment saying, okay, if this continues, then this will be a very small business because the initial niche itself is very small. So that is when we were like, okay, what do we do? And, that also was an exploration journey where we figured out what we should do. But that is what led to the pivot.
We're talking about adjacent categories and industries, especially about the logistics. So that itself, like you said, it's an exploration unto itself. So you begin talking to a few people and then try and understand. In that phase, what was, let's say, one of the biggest assumptions which that didn't hold up as and when you started speaking to people in the logistics industry? Can you boil down to just say one or two things?
Assumptions that got disproved or that got
Yes, disproved.
Disproved.
Yeah.
Okay. I think the first one is that, logistics companies also have, lat-longs associated with each of the events in their journey. So what I mean by that is, when you place an order, let's say on Swiggy, there are different events that happen. You place an order, the order gets assigned to the driver, the order gets assigned to the restaurant accepts it. So these are events, right? And each event has a specific lat-long that's associated with it, because each of this is happening at a certain location and a certain time. With logistics companies, right? Like order, placed, or order gone to the warehouse, or order reached pickup, stuff like that. People had, in a lot of cases, they didn't have anything. In a lot of cases, they had addresses. And it was only in the hyper local space, like when it was in the last mile, is when they started collecting lat-longs. So I think this was the biggest sort of thing that got disproved, that, logistics companies are not on par in terms of the tech maturity and the capability that a hyper-local company will have. And hyper-local is much more chaotic in the sense that, there is random demand, there's random supply. It's very fast, right? The deliveries are very fast. So you need to have that kind of tech to be able to support those SLAs. Right now, that time there was no 10-minute delivery when we started, but 10-minute delivery is even more complex, right? That time there was just on demand. But logistics is more, this is the second hypothesis. Logistics was more, planned. And they had, and it, for example, half an hour delay or 1 or 2 hours delay did not even matter that much to the business at that moment, right? So we also realized that this pain is not that big of a pain. Like, it's not a painkiller for a lot of these companies as compared to the hyperlocal companies.
Fair. I think, obviously two things actually matter any category or industry we look at. One is obviously some things our prospects or the players in the industry can control, whereas other things are just systematic to the category itself.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yes.
Would you say, going back, if you reflect on these days, you would have asked better questions or to unearth better insights to actually understand, the problem may not be necessarily here, but it is actually down the line, or the problems happens right at the beginning where they have tried to solve at the end, right? That is, would that how you reflect upon it?
100%. Like I said, what I would do now is have all the niches of my market with very detailed ICP for each of them and very clear insights on how big are each of these segments. Who would be the buyer? What is the pain point? How are they using it today? And how much are they willing to pay? Do they have the right data that they need, depending again on your product? So I would have all of these very well researched and documented. It's not to say that we didn't have it back then. We did raise a seed round, and you need to sort of answer all of these things to your investors.
Fair.
But I would say it was not that detailed. Like I said, we did speak to these companies, but it was not as in depth as I would have liked it to be.
Fair. Can we talk about, it is one challenge is to get people to talk, to get people's time. For example, in the logistics or whatever categories you were targeting, people have very little time unless and until they see something really interesting that may benefit them in their line of work. So what was those initial challenges like? How did you get people to talk? You see what I mean?
One is you have to figure out what your value proposition is in the first place. Like, what exactly are you promising them? And then you run different experiments and tests in terms of the campaigns that you're sending. But let's say you've been doing this for a while and you're still not able to book calls with your persona. I would really, say that maybe, the value prop in itself is not ringing a bell for them. Right?
Correct.
So, which is why validation in itself is at different stages of the journey, right? And so these early stage validation we did really, really well, where we were able to sort of book our meeting rates or our open rates or our demo rates. They were really, really high. But again, a lot of these things you only realize when you're very deep into the market, and then you're like, okay, maybe this is something very obvious that we didn't look. But maybe they're very hard to uncover in the early stages of the
Fair,
journey,
fair.
which
No,
is
fair.
why so many startups even fail, right? Um, but yeah, and to answer your question, I think if you're not able to book meetings or book calls, that should be a red flag in terms of whether the promise or the value is even high. But of course, for that conclusion to happen, you need to like design an experiment where you say, I'm going to
Correct.
run this for so many days.
Yeah.
This is my hypothesis. This is what I'm going to test with these many people, and so on.
Fair. I think, yeah, actually, validation is so important because only on that you have to anchor whatever positioning and messaging. Because execution of campaigns has become so easy because there are so many tools. And now with AI, you can get content to be written or produced or repurposed from original pieces. But the actual homework of what actually resonates, what makes somebody who may not pay much attention to the first email, the second one, or the third one, and say, hang on a minute, this gives me a different perspective. I think that is initial. Outside of these campaigns and getting people to talk, were there any instances of you reaching out to some industry experts in these categories and say, all right, we have a bunch of knowledge which gives us validation. Can we sort of talk to somebody else in the industry and get another layer of validation? Did that happen at any time?
I think I did that very early on. Actually, because I was doing a lot of content marketing, people themselves were reaching out, and I did spend some time on that. But I don't think that is useful. Especially if those people are not in your industry, like they are not your customers. For example, these industry experts, in our case, were these geospatial experts, right? People who were very, they were very proficient with handling, working with location based or geospatial data is what it's called. But they didn't have any idea about the markets we were targeting in terms of your hyperlocal and mobility and delivery, right? So they would advise us to sort of target government or like your science exploratory projects, because again that's a very big use case of geospatial data as well. So in our case that did not really work out, and I would again argue on the fact that why do you even need to do that, right? Like you need to talk to your customers, and if your customers agree to what you're saying and they're willing to use and pay for your product, then the validation of industry experts
Fair.
doesn't really matter.
That is true.
Unless again it's something very technical, like very deep tech thing that you're building, or even you're, let's say, coming up with something new, very new and innovative. Of course, I think you need industry experts in that case, but we did not feel the need to.
Fair. Because out now technical and academic sort of validation means very little, because if you don't have skin in the game, if you don't have a business, if you don't know how to operationalize this, and if you don't, then you wouldn't know where the problem is.
Yeah.
Technology for technology's sake is just academic. It's nothing beyond that. Fair enough. Now, one of the things which stood out to me was that LinkedIn post, which you said you're taking a step back from Locale. And something that stood out in that post is your team, what you said about your team. So you mentioned team camaraderie in the post. What did you do sort of intuitively or intentionally to build that team camaraderie?
Yeah, I think we used to put a lot of active effort into this because, we were really, really, this is something we really cared about. And we used to always, say that, a startup's outcome ultimately is not completely in your control, right? But we want to, while we're doing this, we want to really have fun doing it. And we want to make sure that we have a lot of memories doing this. And the only way I think you can make this happen is if you work with people you really love, you really care for, and who are very smart, right? So having said that, we, for example, if you just start with hiring, we had like a very, very high bar on who we would hire in the team, and everyone in the team was so solid. Once a person comes, making sure they're onboarded really well, they are integrated into the culture, and very small things, like we would always have meals together. We would go to office twice a week, and on those days we would always have our lunches together. And on Fridays we had this ritual of Friday demos where everyone in the team would come and present what they worked on for that week, what the good was, what the bad was, what failed, what worked, all of that, right? And after every Friday, that was our time when we would just like spend time together, chill, play games, do all of that, right? So I think it was not just, like people just working together to solve hard problems. We were just a bunch of people who really loved, enjoyed each other's company and had a lot of fun building it, right? So when we decided to sort of move back and step back from Locale, this was the biggest, priority for us to make sure that all of these people go to even better places, and I think we made that happen.
Yeah, that's remarkable. I think hiring, even with my experience of hiring people, I always feel that I have to balance, hiring completely based on experience, but also there is that conviction. You should
Yeah.
feel that on top of that experience, you have to layer something else. So, how do you think about hiring for conviction versus experience?
Again, this has evolved for me also with time. So now I think the way I would do it is I would decide for every role that we want to hire, we would decide what is a person supposed to do. And are we hiring for a more IC role, or are we hiring for a more managerial role? But we never just hired managers at Locale. Like every manager also had to do some IC work, right? If not all. So yeah, I mean, if it's a managerial role where, you're supposed to manage the people who are sort of working with you, of course, that is when I think experience really matters, because you are managing people and people are not always rational. Like we are sort of, bags of emotions walking
Right,
around
yeah,
all
yeah.
day, right? So I think that's where I think experience really matters. But then there are something very, very important, charters for the company. For example, in our marketing team, we got someone who would sort of, do our performance and who would do our organic, both of that, right? But for that, we were looking for someone who can be an IC, but who also has a lot of experience, right? Like someone who has been there, done that sort of a thing. So again, I think this really, really depends on how critical the role is. We had a designer, by the way, who was, I think just 1 or 2 years experience, but he was so solid. And for that role, we hired, I would say, more for potential than for, immediate capability, because design is a role where you can sort of, it's a little bit more subjective. And we knew that, this person who we hired for in terms of experience can guide this person and help him get nurtured, right? So I think these are all the variables you need to decide when you go and hire for a role.
Now, looking back, how would you do things differently in terms of hiring? Let's say, or let me put it this way. If there are first-time founders watching this, listening to this, what would be your advice to say, if you are about to hire people, do this, don't do this? How would you put it?
I think if you're hiring your first 10 team members, I think it's really important that each of them have to own a specific part of the company or the business, and they have to execute as well. So each person should have a KPI and they should be able to drive that end to end, right? Now, if you get an experienced person, okay. If you get a fresher, okay. I think both of them have their own pros and cons. For example, someone who's not very experienced is a lot more flexible, open to feedback, and very quick in terms of changing in terms of how they work, right? They're very agile and they can get into action very quickly. In my experience, people who are a lot more experienced, there's a lot more baggage to them, right? So they have their own set style and ways of working. So it takes a little bit of time for them to adjust, incorporate your feedback, because they also have their own worldview, which again can also be a pro because you have a different worldview to, what you originally had. So yeah, and this is the job of a founder, right? To balance all of these different perspectives. But it's very important that each of the people who are coming are executing and driving results, right? Now, in terms of the process, and every company has a different way, but I think at the end of the day, people are just, asking the same questions. For example, is this person smart? Now, there are lots of ways you can test that. There are a lot of different roles have different types of tests that people undergo, right? Is this person smart? Can they really do what this job requires them to do? And then there are all your cultural questions, right? For example, does this person have integrity and a strong work ethic? Are they hardworking, right? Are they high agency? I think for that, there are just two ways to figure that out. One is if these people have sort of already demonstrated that before in their career, or secondly, maybe you work with them as an intern for a while and then you have real world data points, and then you can, that's like the best way forward. I think third way to then also validate is if you get really good references, right, from the ex team members or managers. We used to do this for everyone, right? Everyone who joined, we used to make sure we have 2-3 reference checks, and people have amazing things to say about them, right? So these are some ways you can prove whether a person is high agency.
Right. Fantastic. I think so far we have spoken about product, process, and people. Now, once you get your first initial group of customers coming in, then you need to put some money behind to scale. So I want to talk about the initial round of funding and those days. So how did your relationship with investors during that first round? How was that particular phase?
Right. So first round was actually pre-seed round. Then we raised a seed round, and then we did a pre-series A. So we totally did 3 rounds of fundraise. So by first round, should I talk about the pre-seed round or the seed round?
Yes. Yeah. Pre-seed.
Pre-seed.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually our pre-seed was very interesting. And it happened very, very quickly. So when we decided that, we need money now in order to sort of thrive and scale and all of that, I actually started talking to VC funds, because at that moment in 2019, there weren't a lot of pre-seed rounds, pre-seed funds actually. There were only angels, and then there were VC funds, right? So when I went and pitched to VC funds, all of them rejected because they thought we were too early, right? And I don't know how, through, I would say, sheer luck or sheer, I would say, serendipity. When we were in the middle of this fundraise, Weber from Better Capital also decided to start Better Capital, just at that time. And this was supposed to be catered for people like us, founders who are, let's say, first-time founders and not very experienced and maybe have not hit those milestones yet for a VC round, but still need that initial capital to validate, build, explore, all of that. So he was one of the first ones to enter in the Indian market. And I think we were the third or fourth company that he funded. So we did a round with WebHub and a lot of angels that, we already had we had been working with or we had been talking to.
Fair. What was, and then you raised seed as well as another round.
Yes.
Fair. So during these three phases, these three funding phases, I'm sure answering questions and collecting a lot of data points, especially from your own customers, then the TAM, then all of that. So it's some of it is can be collaboratively done, but it's more of you put Locale on your shoulders and you take it to investors, right? So most of it you had to carry it alone. So what was that sort of journey like? Were there moments where you felt you are alone in doing this? What challenges would you say first-time startup founders who are about to raise pre-seed, the first round of funding should watch out for or prepare or brace themselves for?
I think now it's very different actually. Like there's so many funds out there, so many people who fund people at pre-seed. So I feel like there is enough capital in the market if you're someone who has an idea, who's passionate about the idea and is really already, doing things to validate and build, right? What we should be careful during your first fundraise would be, and again, it depends on whether it's an institutional round or not, because institutional rounds are very different from, that of, let's say, a pre-seed. Or now, you have orgs like Antler, EF, Uh, there are a bunch of these, right? YCs, of course, there. So these don't require you to, like get to a specific revenue milestone. I think even if you're early on in your journey, these guys fund you. But maybe we can talk about institutional because that's when things are a little bit more intricate, right? For an institutional round, I think maybe one actionable feedback I can give is, if you're, let's say, putting together a round, uh, it takes a while for your pitch and your story to get right, right? Like, of course, you would, prepare for it. But when you start pitching it, that's when you start realizing the gaps in your story, right? Now, I feel you should, have some funds that you definitely don't want to raise from, where you can go and pitch this to just make your story better before you go and pitch to the top guys that, let's say, you would want to get funded from. So I think that would be a very actionable piece of feedback I can give because we did not do it that way. So in the early pitching rounds, we maybe, spent it on some really good funds. And that time our pitch and the story was not that tight, right? I think that could be one thing. Maybe apart from that, if you can get access to a partner in the fund, that would be obviously much better instead of you going through, let's say, an analyst or an associate. Because, when ultimately your partner is a decision maker, he's a buyer, right? If I just compare this to sales, and if you pitch it to the analyst and the associate, they have to go and pitch your story to the partner. And you don't know how much of that they retained, how much of that really came through.
Lost in translation.
Yeah, lost in translation, right? So I don't know how much of a good job they'll do when they go and pitch your story. So it's always good that you directly talk to the person, the buyer, the decision maker, right? And you make sure all the context is transferred. It's a little hard when you're, again, first time in the ecosystem. But like I said, now things have changed so much because there's so many founders. If you have founder friends, you can always ask them to, introduce you to their funds or their partners. Or you can now reach out to these partners directly.
Okay. I think I want to talk about the post, about your decision to step back from Locale, just throw some light on it. So, what helped you arrive at the decision, to return control and step away? Was there let's say, a defining moment, or was it a decision made gradually through a period of time and then say yes?
So I think it took me a while to get there. So essentially what happened was, the idea that I described was the first idea that we worked on. After that, we pivoted and we built a second product and we again scaled that as well. And again, so that was also in the ops space. It was not for ground ops, but for any business operations, right?
That was related with to sales, correct?
No, that is the most recent one. This was,
okay.
It was basically an alerting and a ticketing product that we built in the middle, right? And essentially with that also, very similar journey happened, where we reached a certain revenue milestone, and then we realized that we're not scaling that fast, right? And this time the reason was very different. The unit economics were not, working out. So we decided to pivot again, right? This was our second pivot. And while we were doing that, right, like I seriously felt extremely exhausted and burnt out, right? I did go and speak with a bunch of mentors, and what they told me is that, this is a part of and parcel of the journey and it will get better, and that I need to focus on healing and self-care and all of that. So I did try, right? Like I really pushed myself, and even with the third idea that we started, we had made a lot of progress. We started building the product and we started doing all our marketing and all of that. So there's a lot of momentum. But while all of this was going on, I could, sense internally that my performance and the way I showed up was not the same. It was not the same as the previous two times, right? And this was not a one-day affair. Like, again, when I say that it was not the same, it was for, a couple of months, right? And And I could see that, I'm not enjoying this anymore. And when you're not enjoying it, it gets really, really hard to then keep doing it every single day, especially in the shoes of a founder, because, uh, you have to, when you reach the office, you have to sort of at least be seen as put together. You can't be breaking apart and falling apart in front of your team all the time, right? They look up to you for that strength and that inspiration and all of that. Um, I think I had to be really honest with myself. This is the part where intellectual honesty really matters, because I was honest with myself and I realized that, I am not able to perform, uh, as compared to what I'm really capable of and as compared to the previous 2 times. Even though I have more experience, but I don't have that much energy, right? And my co-founder was also in a very similar place, and we went back and we told this to investors that we think you're not doing right by you and by the team. And of course, we had a lot of conversations with them over a long period of time. And ultimately, we decided that this is the best course of action for everyone. And it had also been, 5.5 years, which is a very, very long time, right? It's not a short period of time. And I actually had not taken proper time off since I started. And these 5.5 years were very crazy. Like, we went through 3 waves of COVID and recession and so many points of, where the company was almost about to shut down. And I mean, we had all kinds of highs and all kinds of lows, right?
I mean, this on paper, it is 5.5, but what used to happen in a decade and a half, all of that happened in a matter of 5 years.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Exhausting. Yeah.
So I felt really exhausted. I really felt like, again, it's something that, I felt in my intuition that I do need to take a step back and I need to take care of myself and then decide, if I'm ready to do a company again or not. So yeah, I've basically been on a sabbatical for the last 7-8 months now, in a much, much better place as compared to where I was. Really focused on my healing, physical healing, mental healing, creative healing, all of that. And yeah, here I am. I think it was the right decision.
Fair. I think what I understand from how passionately and eloquently you talk about is the two things stand out to me. One is detachment and the other is success. I think they're mutually sort of inclusive. So having been through this journey, what does success mean to you?
I've asked this question to myself a lot of times. I think what internally your success is should be very different from what the world thinks success is, in my opinion. And I think what the world thinks success is eventually comes if you keep hitting your internal definition of success. I'll elaborate on what that means for me. See, for example, the world would consider if a company has reached PMF, that is successful, or if a company has raised, venture funding, it's successful, right? Of course, I'm not saying that makes a lot of sense, right? But those are like point in time events, like when you hit like 1 million ARR, that's when you can say you have reached PMF and you are successful. Or when you raise a VC funding round, that's when you can say you're successful. But what about the every single day where you have to show up, right? I think success would then mean, first of all, you showing up every single day, no matter what the outcome is, right? The showing up is in a way, a successful thing that you're doing. But apart from that, like, for example, just taking care of the inputs, right? So let's say if you're doing a company, then are you taking care of the small things? For example, if a customer has complaints with your product, right? How are you really treating that situation? Or let's say if there's bad PR about your company, how are you really dealing with that? I think what constitutes success, in my opinion, are the ways you handle these everyday situations gracefully and with care and with intention. That is, I think, what determines what eventually happens, right? And now I think for me, and maybe this is not true for everyone, but for me, I've realized there are two additional things that really matter. One is this fun? Like, is this giving me energy? And again, it's very hard to find something that gives you energy every single day. But over a period of time, over a period of 6 months to a year, is this giving me energy or only drowning energy out of me? Right? Uh, that's what determines, I think, if something is fun or not. And secondly, for me, it's really important on whether I really connect with what I'm doing. Like whether the problem that I'm solving or what I'm building, do I have an emotional connection to that? Again, I don't think this is true for everyone. But I think these are all the inputs that are needed. And once you take care of these inputs, you will get to the business success milestone. But I feel what I realized also is that, life is a lot more about your professional success as well. So because I had really, really, for a lack of a better word, maybe fucked up my health over these years, I now realize that just being healthy and feeling healthy for me is also a success. Like being free of illnesses and diseases, right? Or, just getting an opportunity to express myself and my creativity is also a success for me. So yeah, there are these different definitions, right? Like everyday success is just you showing up, doing what you really love, doing something that you deeply connect with, that resonates with you, and just handling situations with a lot of situations that are like crisis situations with a lot of grace and intention is what I would say as is success.
Fair enough. Beautifully put. I think, sometimes we miss the little things or may not pay so much attention to the little things which eventually impact and radiate, impact the big things. That's a beautiful juxtaposition of, the world sort of celebrates raising funds or some other, point in time kind of event, like you said. But at the same time, you have to go a little bit deeper and say, there is a company, that is one entity, there is me. If I'm not in the right place, if I don't feel that challenge or excitement, it may not be every day, like you say, because there are bad times, there are good times, there are challenging times, but opportunities to learn. But if I don't get that sense of excitement, then it starts draining. Everything looks like, everything is pulling me down. Rightly said.
Yeah.
Rightly said. So
See, I used to be that person, who would just celebrate when the world celebrates. And that's when I realized that does not make sense, because you should celebrate if you dealt with a crisis in the most human way possible. Or you should celebrate when a customer who was complaining is now your champion. Or you should celebrate when you converted a lead which was just so hard or challenging to convert. Right? I think all of these things really matter. And maybe it does not require like a very grand celebration, but just, going back to yourself and your team and saying, hey, guys, we did a fucking amazing job and kudos to us. I think just that, I think, makes a lot of difference.
that boosts the morale, actually, which is actually based on actual victory, So I think your point on celebrating what the world celebrates brings me to a question of, if we go back to 2018, 2019, the way you looked at founder journeys to where you are right now, do you look at it any differently?
Founder journey, maybe no.
Mhm.
Uh,
Or a
because
different
I think,
kind of appreciation for the hustle, the challenging days, the victories and stuff like that?
100%. There is no doubt about that. I think if someone has not gone through it, they do. It's like going through, maybe labor pain. If you have not gone through that, no one can really help you understand what it's like. I think I would maybe compare that to, in some ways, to going through that founder journey, right? Like only if you've gone through that, you know how painful, but also how rewarding it is. Like,
Yeah.
and I think now once I'm out of it, I can see there's so many things that felt, earth shattering or that felt hard have taught so many things to me that I could not understand at that moment. I did not, because I didn't have the time to just sit and reflect, to be very honest, right? So much appreciation. But even having said that, no matter at what age you start, whether you start at 40, 30, 20, 50, I think it's the same. And no which industry you start from, it's the same. I think there are situations where people do have overnight success. I'm not going to deny that. There are products and there are a lot of AI stories that we've seen. But it's like when you go to I spoke to the founder of Gamma, which is an AI based
Right.
presentation
Yes, of
company,
course.
right?
Of course.
I
Yeah.
asked this question to him, and he told me the same thing. He had no clue if Gamma would become this big, right? And before Gamma, he tried a bunch of products. Um, so even if there's let's say overnight success or breakout success, you cannot know, right? That's not completely in your hands uh, on how your product will actually play out. So uh, yeah, I mean, like I said, you just have to keep taking care of the inputs. That's all in your control.
Fair enough. Because if getting there is a big enough challenge, I mean, sustaining there is an even bigger challenge. Now that you're successful, let's say even 100 days or a year, now you have to stay there.
Yeah,
You can't fall back because
yeah,
the
and
world
you're
is
not gonna
changing too
get that,
fast. Yeah,
and you're not gonna get that external validation every day, right?
that's
So
true.
what carries you for the rest of the days,
Yeah, that
right?
that is fair enough. And you also said that in that post you said you'd want to give back something to the community, to the founder
Right.
community. So we've also spoken about a lot of things, how you would do differently, and also a lot of good advice and suggestions to first time founders. But if we have to summarize, let's say if you were advising a first time founder today in the B2B context, what's the one thing you would want them to truly understand about building business in B2B?
Okay, I think and we're talking B2B, and I also want to add the context of AI as well, because I think it's in B2B especially, it's probably going to be hard to do something without AI unless you're doing deep tech or climate tech and these other fields. Um, I think I was talking to someone a couple of days back on this. I think now the world has changed a lot and it's easier to build the product, so much easier to build the product. Product building has gotten commoditized. If I were starting a company today, what I would do is focus on distribution first and build a way of distribution before, even if not before, then at least in parallel to building my product. I will not just focus on building the product, right? Of course, and I would build a product that is like really, it has to be a kick-ass product. There is no chance of a bad product surviving in this
Correct.
market. Even
Right,
if you've
right.
raised hundreds of millions of VC money, maybe you will sustain for a while through marketing, through all of that. But in the long run, only the product, which is like absolute 100x of what is being done today, is only going to survive, right? So I think distribution is what I would focus on. Now, it depends on what kind of a product you're building. Are you building a prosumer SaaS? Are you building an enterprise SaaS? If you're building enterprise SaaS, just, maybe networking and building connects with those industries that I want to target. Or if you're building a prosumer SaaS, then, being very active on your preferred channels, whether that's LinkedIn, Twitter, or Reddit, all of that. I think those things would really, really make a difference now.
Fair. I think this has been a very, let's say, an in-depth conversation with a lot of things to take away for the audience. Just before I wrap up, Aditi, what excites you now? What are you about to do? And you may or may not share, but what excites you about the kind of work you want to do next?
I am still figuring out what I want to do. I mean, I still have a bunch of opportunities, options. So I'm still figuring that out. Like I said, I think I've realized I've really, really figured out what my values are. I've really, really figured out what are the conditions that I need in order to do my best work, right? And I was just talking about a friend, about all of this yesterday, that after a long time in my life, in this sabbatical is when I felt aligned. I don't know if you understand that sentiment, but aligned is when, you don't feel like you have to put a lot of effort to make things happen. It feels a little bit more effortless. You're just showing up and you're doing things, you're putting effort, but it just feels a lot more effortless. Like it feels more like play, right? And So I've written a bunch of things that I need in order to make sure I am in that mindset where, work feels a little bit more like play. Of course, not always, but again, I'm talking over a sustained period of time. Work gives me joy. Work feels like fun. Now, exactly how that translates in terms of a job title or which industry or doing another company, I don't know. I'm still figuring out, to be very honest. And I'm not really attached to the idea of ki aise, like it should happen in this way. Like I'm open, right? So yeah, let's see how it shapes up and how it'll actually turn out for me.
Fantastic. I think Aditi 1.0 has been a remarkable journey. Now
Yeah.
I'm waiting for 2.0.
Yeah, I do feel that way, I actually feel like I am a very, very different person now. I'm sure everyone goes through that, but it's like every day when I wake up, I feel like by different, I mean, I can, it's very easy for me to point out in the areas where I have grown and healed and, like I can very easily articulate, this is what I was and this is where I am now. So it does feel like this is 2.0, and yeah, let's see what the world and the future has in store for me.
Fantastic. I wish you all the best, and so from my audience on their behalf as well. And I hope you figure out something very exciting, and I'll be here to capture the story whenever you're
Thank
ready.
you so much. It was
All
a
right.
pleasure talking to you, Santosh. Bye
Same here.
bye.
Take it. Bye.